Yo, what is going on, guys? It is Jonathan back again with the Weekly Scuffle, and of course, I'm here doing an NFL mock draft. And honestly, this draft, I'm trying to do it kind of quickly, not really go in depth, super in depth into every pick, but just how I like, the draft order as it is right now. Kind of, you could see it ending like this, but at the same time, it could also be very different by the time the end of the season comes. So we'll have to wait and see how all this plays out. But as of right now, this is the draft order we're going with. And number one pick, you're the Falcons. In my opinion, there's one QB above the rest of them. Granted, he does have injury concerns, size concerns, but as someone who is a Dolphins fan and has seen Tua play with an actual good NFL coach and some weapons, players like that can thrive in the NFL. Granted, the injury history will always be there, but if you want a guy to lead your team for the next 15, 20 years potentially, you want the best available option, and that is Bryce Young in this draft, in my opinion. So Falcons get Bryce Young. You maybe stay with Mariota for another year and develop Bryce Young. You don't have to force him in right away. Granted, they probably will because that's just how it works now. And Davis Mills has proven to not be it. So in my opinion, CJ Stroud, that's the pick here. Honestly, for Houston, that's not a bad consolation prize, of course. Ohio State QBs haven't necessarily been the best, but at the same time, I like CJ Stroud's potential. I think if you surround him with the right pieces, then it could definitely work. We'll have to see how they surround him. I feel like they already have some solid players, and I think CJ Stroud definitely fits the timeline of this team. So CJ Stroud for Houston makes a lot of sense, and Detroit actually gets a QB that I really like for them simply because I think Jared Goff can definitely play for another year. And in my opinion, this quarterback, you develop him, and I think he just fits the system. You got some playmakers, you got DeAndre Swift, you got Amon Ra, you know, potentially maybe get another wide receiver. You reinforce that O line and give this kid a year to sit, which I think Will Levis is the next best quarterback. I very much like his talents. Granted, this is a top three pick. You would have three quarterbacks going back to back. But in my opinion, I think Levis could work very well in Detroit, and that's just the pick for me here. I don't think there's really a question about it. And now we got the Seahawks, and in my opinion, if you're here, these top three are gone, which these are my top three. If they are gone, then you could look at Anthony Richardson, but in my opinion, I would rather take Will Anderson. You just get yourself a cornerstone on the defensive side of the ball. And, Geno Smith hasn't been bad, so, maybe you just rock with him for another year and just see where the tide takes you. But Will Anderson, I feel like is definitely the option here. Possibly the best player in the draft. Maybe Jalen Carter could be another option here, but in my opinion, I prefer edge over interior D line any day of the week, unless the talent gap is higher. And of course, in this case, I think Will Anderson is a better player than Carter, but granted, Carter's still a great player. And of course, speaking of Carter, you got Miles Murphy, you got Brian Brees, but I think Jalen Carter for the Jets makes a lot of sense. The Jets just beat the Dolphins, but granted, the Dolphins are massacred with injuries right now, so I think they will probably end up lower. They probably will go on a losing streak very soon. And Jalen Carter, that's definitely a solid pickup for them. And now we got the Jaguars. The Jaguars have had some issues both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And honestly, I think for them, it could be take best player available at this point. And I think that's Miles Murphy. I very much like him as a prospect. He has all the tools and ability to be a DN for the future. Why not? Your defense is already solid. You could ask for a no lineman, but at the same time, I think when you have a young QB, it is better to go into free agency and address needs in free agency to help your quarterback. And I think Miles Murphy just makes a lot of sense here. Very value pick. And now we have the Panthers, which if I was a Panthers fan, I would be praying. And now with the firing of Matt Rule and potentially a fire sale of trades, you probably will end up with the top three picks. But just in case in this draft they don't end up with the top three pick, and honestly, there's a lot of players that they can take, and there's a lot of players I like. But at the same time, you have Baker Mayfield, so do you really need to take someone that high? And you got a lot of pieces, so I think why not just, in my opinion, for rookie QB, just ensure the O line. And I think Peter Skoronski makes a lot of sense here. Granted, their O line hasn't been terrible by any means, but I think Skoronski has that flexibility, could play guard, could play tackle. Great pickup here. And now we got the Bears. The Bears are a very interesting team because I feel like they could use a lot of players and a lot of positions, specifically wide receiver and O line. I think I was a fan of Justin Fields coming in, and I think he's a very good player, but at the same time, we need more clearly on this team. And honestly, I see no reason not to take Jackson Smith. Nick Jigba here, I've seen him mocked even at 5. And why not? He is a great wide receiver. I think it makes a lot of sense for this team. And honestly, I think him paired with Darnell Mooney is a solid tandem right there for Justin Fields moving forward. And now we got the Giants. And yes, I am going to draft none other than Anthony Richardson. People keep saying it. I kind of agree. Brian Dable with Anthony Richardson is kind of a cheat code. I think if you put them together, potentially sit a year. I think that's definitely the best way. Just sit a year. The Giants have actually been good this year, so that's interesting. And maybe who knows? Maybe they're not in the market for a QB at the end of the season. But I think if Dable is there, I think he doesn't see what he wants in Danny Dimes. I think Richardson is the perfect project for him moving forward. And now you have Washington, another team that can use a QB. But granted, QB isn't necessarily a high commodity here. I think you might as well just draft the best corner, in my opinion, in the draft, Kylie Ringo. I think he's definitely the best corner. I think he adds a lot to his defense. His defense is already very good. And in my opinion, I think Ron Rivera probably would be fired at the end of the season. So why not just stick with what Carson Wentz, build this defense to be a top defense in the NFL, and just see what happens. But granted, Kylie Ringo, that's definitely the pick for me here. And now we got the Steelers, which this is a very interesting team because they definitely need O-line. And honestly, I think that's just their biggest need at this point. You got Kenny Pickett fighting for his life. Najee could barely get any yards. Your wide receiver room is very good. Your defense is very good. In my opinion, Broderick Jones, probably the second best tackle in this draft for me. Personally, I would take Broderick Jones here. I think he's a great pickup. And honestly, maybe trade back. I mean, it depends. Tackles tend to move up closer to the draft. So I think Broderick Jones at 11 wouldn't be a bad pick at all. So that's definitely the pick for me here. And now we have the Vikings, which honestly, the Vikings, how they're this high up, I'm actually kind of confused. But regardless, let's just say they end up here. Vikings, honestly, at this point, you have weapons on the outside. There's no QB you could really take here, at least none that are worth it. And, maybe you could go for someone like a Jordan Addison, but I don't think they would go wide receiver, especially with Justin Jefferson. Maybe you would look to replace Adam Thielen. But I think this is definitely a spot for linebacker, and my favorite linebacker in this draft, Trenton Simpson. I think he is a beast. Great coverage linebacker, great blitzer. I think he's definitely going to be a top pick in this draft, possibly even top 10 when comes draft time. But I would definitely take this pick here. And now you have the New Orleans, my bad. This is a New Orleans pick, but it's going to Philadelphia. And for a while there, it was looking Philly was going to get a top 4 pick, but New Orleans has gotten a couple wins. So we'll see where this pick ends up closer to the draft. But granted, I think this is definitely still a good spot to take a corner. Granted, you have Slay, you have good corners now, but I still think Joey Porter fits his system. He's a great man coverage corner, and why not just take him? This pick isn't your pick. You, at this point, would have a top pick. I think I think the Eagles are actually going to be a team where they are going to have a top pick, and they're going to be probably in the NFC championship game. Will they win it? I don't know, but their schedule is very easy, at least in the regular season, and I believe their team is very well balanced. So Joey Porter makes sense for me. Take him. And now we have the Raiders, and honestly, I just see this as a pick right here. It just makes too much sense. Brian Brees does not fall more than this. I think Raiders take him. It's just a Raiders pick in my head. Raiders low key might have a higher pick at this point. Come draft time, I think they will be better, but granted, let's just say they don't. Brian Brees, definitely a solid pickup for them regardless. And now the New England Patriots. They definitely need wide receiver. I definitely think that's something they could use. And there's some decent wide receivers. But the one I like is Jordan Addison. I think he makes a lot of sense for this team. Will Bill Belichick draft a wide receiver in the first? N'Keal Harry didn't really work out. I don't know, but I think Jordan Addison would be a great weapon for Mac Jones, and that's personally the pick I would make. And we got the Titans, who the Titans could use O linemen. Do I like these tackles? I kind of like Paris Johnson, but I think guard is definitely the way to go. And I think there is one guard who I like a lot, and that is Andrew Voorhees. I think he could help ensure the inside of this team. And honestly, I think Andrew Voorhees on the Titans just makes a lot of sense. You could look at maybe John Michael Schmitz, a center. You know, Titans O line has definitely taken a hit, and when your offense is basically built around the running back, that's not something you want. But at the end of the day, Andrew Voorhees I think is still a solid pickup here. And now we got the Texans with the second pick of their draft, and honestly, I think wide receiver could be in play here. I am not against it, but at the same time, I think they are a team that could potentially draft a wide receiver like a Keyshawn Booty, who I don't believe will really be a first round pick this year in the beginning of the second round. And I think there's a player I like who, come draft time, would definitely end up being a higher ranked player, potentially fly aboard. I think it's Michael Mayer, baby Gronk. You know, he blocks, he catches. I think he's a great pick. And honestly, I think at this point in the draft, 17, it's not a bad pickup if he's still there at this point in time. And, it just gives another weapon for CJ Stroud, who I believe we drafted. And, it gives a weapon slash blocking ability, which is always a nice thing to have from the tight end position. So I think this is a great pickup. And now we move on to the Eagles, who are on the board again. The Eagles pick being this low, kind of confusing, but regardless, I think the Eagles will have a higher pick than this. Granted, let's just say they do end up here, they come back down to earth a little bit. I think someone like, where is he? Bijan Robinson, there he is. I think that makes a lot of sense. I believe them to be picking way later, clearly in the first round. And I think Bijan Robinson makes a lot of sense. I think they will be down here. So I think this is a very likely pick. I think he's one of the better offensive talents in the NFL. As a Dolphins fan, let's just say we get like the 23rd pick. I wouldn't mind trading down later into the first, getting some extra picks, and then drafting Bijan. I think Bijan is going to be a great NFL player, probably right out the gate. And when you have a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, who are pretty fairly even across the board. They have not that many weaknesses, and then let's say you address something, you address not even a need, but you address a critical position where you could eventually move on from some contracts and still have a high caliber player, Joey Porter. Why wouldn't you take the risk or just take the surefire thing in a Bijan Robinson? Your O line is great. You now have Jalen Hurts, you have Devonta Smith, you have AJ Brown, you have Bijan Robinson. I think that's a top NFL offense, and I think that's great. And now we have the Baltimore Ravens, who, in my opinion, probably will be looking at the linebacker position. And there is a linebacker I like, and that is Noah Sewell. I think he's a great linebacker. I think he hasn't shown what he showed last year this year, but I do think he will show it throughout the year. I think he will improve, and I think his draft stock will rise eventually. And I think he's a great pickup. I think in the right scheme, he'll definitely work. And I think being under John Harbaugh, he drafted Kyle Hamilton. I think those two guys for the future are just an amazing duo, and I would like that on both those levels. And moving on to the Cardinals. The Cardinals are a team that definitely could use cornerback, and there is a lot of corners here that they could use. But in my opinion, Garrett Williams, I think that's a great pickup for them. I actually saw one of his games. He was amazing. Honestly, I think that's a great pick. I like him for the Cardinals, and I think he could be a number one corner in the NFL, but time will tell. I think that's a great pick. And now we have the Seahawks from Denver. This pick should actually be higher too. I'm just using the NFL mock draft simulator, so this is a little off, but granted, I still think it's somewhat accurate. You'll have some of these teams moving up and down, but granted, we're only 5 weeks in at this point. It's going to move regardless. And we have the Seahawks with another pick. At the beginning, we drafted Will Anderson. So, what do you do here? Do you go for offense? Do you go for defense again? I think you go for O line. I think that just makes the most sense for me here. And of course, you're not necessarily looking for the best O lineman, but well, you're not looking for the best position, I would say. Like in theory, you would like to get a guard or maybe a center, but would you draft a center at this point? Maybe, maybe not. I think Paris Johnson out of Ohio State makes a lot of sense here. I think it would be a great pickup for them. And why not take him here? I think that's a great pick. And now we have the Chargers, who could also use O line. Granted, do I think there are that many O line prospects left? Not really. I mean, I like Zion Nelson, I like Blake Freeland, but I think they're at this point, the Chargers should just go best player available, in my opinion. And for me, that's Andre Carter. I think Andre Carter is a great player. I think he fits the Chargers, and I think looking long term, yeah, they have Khalil Mack, but looking long term, Andre Carter, Joey Bosa is a great duo, and I think that could definitely work with Andre Carter developing. So I would definitely take him at this point in the draft. And now we have the Miami Dolphins, who, in my opinion, could use some positions. Granted, I would have liked Bijan Robinson as a trade down spot. I would like Trenton Simpson, possibly, but he's going higher in the draft. And maybe a Michael Myers. I would like Andrew Voorhees too. There's definitely some O line prospects I would like. But at this point in the draft, if you're the Heat, I mean, if you're the Dolphins, you take who I believe is the best player available at this point in the draft, Felix Uzoma, and I like him off the edge. I think he's a great player. I think he's definitely going to work well in the Dolphin scheme. And you got Jalen Phillips. Ogba's getting up there in age. Why not get yourself another edge? And we have the Colts, who I believe this pick will be higher potentially, but granted that division is kind of in flux, so maybe they will get this pick. And honestly, I think weapon is definitely the way to go for them. And I think Quentin Johnson is probably the best player here at this point in time. And I think that's a great pickup for them. You got Michael Pittman, you get Quentin Johnson. Great duo, potentially draft. I believe they should draft another QB at some point, but regardless, that's a great pick. And you got the Cowboys, the America's team. And this team, in my opinion, could use a variety of things, but I do believe this is a team where you kind of have to go line, in my opinion. I think Blake Freeland fits here. I think he's probably the best pick. You've dealt with injuries. You could probably play him at guard and tackle. So why not take him at this point in time? And I think that's a great pickup for them. And the Bengals, same thing with the Bengals. Their O line has been kind of bad this year. Like, you could look potentially best player available. The defense, I don't believe they'll draft a safety. I think corner is definitely something they could look at. And that's probably the position I'll go with for them, because I think corner could definitely help them. And in my opinion, I think Cam Smith, I think he works well. I think he's great for the Bengals. And honestly, it just depends on Zach Taylor. I feel like he will be fired at some point. Maybe this season, maybe next, but it depends on the playoff standings and where they are. If Zach Taylor could somehow get them to the playoffs again, then who knows? Maybe he doesn't get fired. But I think Cam Smith, great corner at this point in the draft. I think it works well for them. And now we have the Lions, who we have drafted Will Levis for them, which I like personally a lot. And I think in their team, he would be insane. And I think someone like Eli Ricks will probably be a solid pickup. But at the same time, I like Tyreek Stevenson. I think Tyreek Stevenson out of Miami, he is a great corner, and he kind of reminds me of that Dan Campbell type of energy. He gives off that same energy. So I think this is a great pickup for them. And why wouldn't you go a good corner? I mean, their defense has struggled. Their offense has been great. You sit Will Levis behind Jared Goff for a year, and you let Stevenson develop with Okuda, with Hutchinson, and those guys get better, and your defense gets better. Of course, the Packers on the clock, they should go wide receiver here. I should just force them to take a wide receiver here at this point, and I probably would, or probably will, I should say. And honestly, I think if I were to take a wide receiver, if it's not Booty, which kind of been playing like Booty, but at the same time, I think he's still a talented player. In my opinion, Josh Downs, great player. I think he would work well with Aaron Rodgers. Granted, I think a lot of wide receivers would work well with Aaron Rodgers. But just for the sake of this draft, we'll take Josh Downs. And we got the Chiefs, who could also go wide receiver, but I think cornerback Eli Ricks, great pickup at this point. I honestly think he's a great player for them. And why not, right? I think Eli Ricks, solid corner. Your defense hasn't been great, but hasn't been necessarily bad. But with Patrick Mahomes, you don't necessarily need to draft a wide receiver who doesn't belong at this pick. So Eli Ricks, definitely a nice pickup for me. And you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, in my opinion, could potentially be looking for QB here at this point. It's very, very likely they would be. Granted, I believe best player available, probably the best option for them, and I think Antonio Johnson being the best safety works well for this team. And why not take him? I think he fits the defense, and at this point in time, yeah, you could wait to the second round, but I think he's clear cut the best safety. So why not just take him and just boost your position that you don't really need boost, but I always think it's at these later picks, it's best to take best player available. Speaking of best player available, we got the Bills, and honestly, their edge, I would like Nolan Smith here, but I feel like their edge has been quite good. So I think somebody that I would like to take for them would be Javon Dexter. He's actually played very well. And honestly, I think he's just a beast. I think the interior of the Bills line might be their only weakness if they really have a weakness at all. So I think Javon Dexter, solid pickup. And that's the full first round. And honestly, I like some of these picks. Granted, the order is a little wonky, but at the end of the day, the order is going to change regardless by the end of the draft. So I think these are some solid prospects these teams could look at. And at the same time, I think there are some prospects that potentially could rise as the college season moves on and as the NFL season moves on. But regardless, we'll see how this all plays out and see you next time. Peace.